Welcome to the first ever BrotherBoard video content about the game of diplomacy. I'm your host, BrotherBoard. In this video series, I will be discussing a match that I am currently playing against 6 other diplomacy content producers. We have all agreed to play this match together and in some way offer our perspective about the match through the different media outlets that we use to communicate about diplomacy. The idea here is that we will give players an interesting opportunity to study one match of diplomacy from 7 different vantage points. I, BrotherBoard, have decided to produce a video series where I will record my thoughts about every turn for about 5 or 10 minutes so that I can add them all together over the course of a match and produce a video or video series that will explain roughly what happened during this match of online diplomacy. We're playing using the tool Backstabber, and we are playing it as a match of online diplomacy, which means that we're sending only written messages to each other. There's no video chats. The match is also being played over a 48 hours per turn time period. So if the match lasts, let's say 15 years, then this game of diplomacy could go on for several months. I am prepared. I am ready. I'm interested. I'm ready to play against these players. I'm so excited about this match. Thank you, everyone who is prepared to play with me, and thank you, everyone, for watching. Hopefully, this will turn out to be an interesting video series. So the first thing I do every match, I imagine a lot of players do this as well, is I want to know, what country did I get? Which country am I going to play? And the answer to this game is Germany. I'm excited. I'm excited to be assigned Germany as the country that I play because, for one, I think I have a pretty successful track record with Germany. I feel confident that I know how to win as this country. And second, Germany is a central power, which means Germany is more engaged from the beginning of the match. And even though that sometimes means Germany is a little bit weaker, the central powers are sometimes tactically weaker, I think they're more fun to play. So that's exciting for me. Early on, I got some messages from France that seemed pretty reasonable. They're terse messages. France made it clear right away that they're going to open up to Burgundy, which is not disappointing as Germany, but of course it's not the most favorable opening. I got the impression that France is a reasonable and diligent player who's open to the possibility of allying with Germany, maybe even very serious about it. And that makes sense because a lot of times an early alliance with Germany is a big starting point to a French solo win. So I believe that this player is a possible ally for me, and I'm interested in working with them. I got some messages from England that were appealing to the possibility of an Anglo-German alliance. I sort of flubbed a little bit and overstated my willingness to ally England as Germany, as I actually think that maybe Russia's the better ally for Germany in most matches, but it doesn't matter. I still like an alliance with England if it goes well. As I'm evaluating the English press, I just can't escape the feeling that the English player maybe would want to go for Belgium if we're going to both work together, and therefore the French offer is maybe a little bit better with all things being equal. Meanwhile, my press with the Russian player, we seem to hit it off, and probably in no small part due to my willingness to help the Russian player get into Sweden in 1901, and my emphasis on how strong that I think a Russian-German alliance can be, etc., etc. I hope that will bear fruit, and due to the small amount of press I got from the French and English player, I got a little nervous maybe for a while that there might be an Anglo-French understanding, in which case it's even more important that I have the possibility of working with the Russian if I have to have some ally somewhere. The Backstabber interface allows for group messages, which is something that I'm not familiar with. I normally play on web diplomacy, and it doesn't offer that feature. So that was something that was kind of strange for me to navigate. So of those 3 players, I feel like the Russian seems to be in my corner. I I'm skeptical about the English player. I said a lot of nice things to them, made it seem like I was really interested in alliance. But the truth is, I'm actually quite skeptical about them. And the French player, I sort of like their rather sparse but to the point messaging, and maybe that is a player I'd be willing to work with. In the other areas of the map, I got the usual understanding from Austria and Italy that we won't menace each other early in the game. Hopefully that holds. That's something that, in my experience playing diplomacy, is a very good early agreement between the Central Powers. It seems very credible to me. And for the most part, the metagame expectations from each of the powers as to what they thought was a normal way for alliances to play out or what opening moves should be were pretty consistent with my expectations. And that was a relief to me because I was a little nervous that maybe my understanding of these players' expectations might be different since I've mostly played diplomacy on just the one community of web diplomacy, which has its own metagame expectations. And perhaps the most notable thing is that the Italian player sent a huge amount of long press compared to most of the other players. And although I really value cooperation with Italy as Germany, I found myself feeling a little overwhelmed. I thought maybe I don't really see myself being able to work very well with this player in the long run, despite my efforts to want to work with Italy as who I feel is a pretty good ally for Germany in most matches. I also made clear that I have a belief in German-Austrian cooperation. To the Austrian player, they seem to believe or respect my attitude on this, and I hope that in the long run, that we'll have some mutual understanding and be able to work together. This strategy, I tend to agree that that's the better way to start the game. Most players don't really detect the cooperation or coordination that's going on between Germany and Austria until much later in the game. So after listening to everything, reading all the messages, nothing I heard changed my opinion that I should open up with my usual default German spring 1901 moves, which are move Munich to Ruhr, to move Kiel to Denmark, and to move Berlin to Kiel. And boy, oh boy, some players egg me on to make very hostile openings to one player or another. Some in jest, and some really trying to persuade me to do it, and that's fine. I can't fault them for trying that, but without something really very credible, very serious, and appealing offer, I almost never open up by attacking one of my neighbors in 1901, making a big gamble on that, especially as Germany, a central power that can afford to maybe wait a couple of turns to see where my friends really are and who I should trust and not trust. So I decided to play it safe and just make a normal opening this game. Let's see if I have made any friends or enemies at the end of this turn. So, at the beginning of autumn 1901, I take a look at what has happened on the board, and I have a little more information about the players around me besides their mere words. And the board is pretty interesting to see. Most of the players opened rather predictably. And one that's surprising and interesting, perhaps the most notable thing for me as Germany, is that France has opened to English Channel, which I had hoped for and anticipated, but you're never really sure about these things until you get to see. From my point of view, the most notable thing about the players' personalities is that the Italian player and we don't really seem to play the game the same way, and I'm not sure how our styles are compatible, which is kind of unfortunate for me since I think of Italy as one of the better allies for Germany. Prior to the end of the turn, the Italian player published a message to everyone, a long message explaining what all of his orders are. If that guy's willing to tell everyone about his moves, what else is he willing to tell players about? And sure enough, at the start of the turn, early on, the French player got real stern with me about the Italian player's move to Piedmont, and apparently I kind of believed the French player about this, that the Italian player said that I had something to do with his move into Piedmont. My reaction to the Italian player is, why am I discussing things with you if you're willing to leak the information from that conversation or throw me under the bus when things get hot. Why should I even talk to you about stuff? And with the French player, with friends like this, who needs enemies? You know, if I'm going to get blamed for something that another guy does that I really don't have any direct control over, or have to deal with that player being really anxious about the beginning of the turn when my German opening was about as neutral as it can be. And the French opening is even ever so slightly anti-German due to having opened to Burgundy with support like that. So initially I was thinking, hey, maybe the way to go is I should work with the French player and the Russian player to take down the English player. But as the turn unfolded, the English player wasn't really that frustrated about what had happened. And instead, the opening wasn't that favorable because the French player got into the channel, but reached out to me and said, oh, darn, I can't believe this happened. Well, maybe we can work together, etc. And I thought, wow, you know, it sure is nice that this English player isn't trying to blame me for the fact that the French player opened the English channel, even though I did have something to do with it, a little more so than the Italian player moving into Piedmont. So I started liking this player, and it started to shift my opinion about the trajectory of the game. I originally had schemed with the French player on how we were going to shut down England, but then I changed that idea to think, well, you know, maybe I could help the English player get their help against the French. And I decided that I should clear this with perhaps my most sincere or serious alliance of any of my three northern neighbors with Russia. Is this player going to be cool with it? What if I support England to Belgium? Number one, can I believe that you're going to keep a secret about this conversation? And indeed, the player said that they couldn't. I didn't hear anything about it through the grapevine. And that made me feel pretty good about them. And if they were willing to say, well, you do what you want. I hope that you will help me against England in the future, but you got to make your own moves. Maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. I trust you to figure it out. And I felt pretty good about that this alliance I want to have with the Russian player perhaps is my most serious one, because that player seems to be very flexible and not trying to dictate to me anything in particular. I'm willing to trust that our relationship is one that can carry us through the game and not necessarily the tactical particulars. It is going to make it a little troublesome if I have both England as Russia as my allies. For many turns, that might be hard because someone's going to want to get knocked out of Scandinavia, but not impossible. It's not out of the question that England, Germany, and Russia could cooperate for a long time. It's possible, especially if the English player concentrates against France with me and we agree to leave Russia well enough alone. Maybe that could go somewhere. So I decided after thinking about it and talking to the players that I was going to work with England. And so my orders are to hold with Denmark, let Russia into Sweden, which I have planned since last turn, and that's part of my cooperation with Russia, to move Kiel into Holland. And I don't think England will stop me, and that'll gather that up and give me 2 captures, which is nice. It'll be 2 builds unless France moves into Munich. And I'm going to use Ruhr to support an English convoy from Yorkshire to Belgium. Meanwhile, England's going to, I hope, if they keep their promises, move Norwegian Sea into Norway, and that'll give England 2 captures. And so as long as France doesn't move English Channel into London, then England will also get 2 builds, and then we'll have 10 pieces between us if everything goes according to plan. And that should be enough to take down a French player that I expect to only have 4 pieces at the end of 1901. But I could be wrong. I put some effort into making sure that the French player believed that England was going to cover London, and England tried to work on that too. It's possible that we have a reverse psychology ourselves, and the French player thinks it's a bluff and is going to go for London. That's okay with me. It's not that great if France is strong and my ally England is weak. But there can be a silver lining there, which is having a weak ally means that there's someone you can more easily backstab later on. So to me, that's not a disaster. The only disaster I can imagine is the French player seeing through my plan to help England and instead going for Munich, or just feeling that they need to be as strong as possible and they go for Munich anyway, even though I'm not covering it. I told them I wasn't going to cover Munich. I hope that doesn't come to be something I regret. But based on everything I've seen from the players' messages, that seems like what they're likely to do. Finally, I exchanged virtually no messages with Austria and Turkey. It's a shame, but there's only so much time in a day, and I'm sure they were working much harder messaging their neighbors, and I didn't really have anything in particular to say to them. I directly told the Italian player that I was going to play my cards a little closer to the chest this turn, and I hope that they're willing to be anti-French once they see what England and I are doing, but who knows for sure. Okay, let's see what happens. All right, I look at the adjudication, and my thoughts are, yes! Yes! It worked. My efforts worked. I'm very excited. I'm very proud that things transpired in the turn the way that I hoped they would. So I had my coordination with England, that I had to hope that England was going to keep up their end of the bargain in terms of the moves that we coordinated in the convoy to Belgium. And I was also hoping that France would not perceive that we were doing this, as France had a really powerful counter move available that would have allowed France to have a 3-build opening and left me and England in pretty weak positions, not having that many builds. So it was important that France not realize this. And it was possible that France could have figured it out, since the Russian player, I had talked with them to make sure that the Russian would accept my supporting an English convoy into Belgium and not alienate that player too much. They could have leaked it to the French player or had an effect on that, and that didn't happen. I also decided to withhold what I was doing with England from Italy to prevent the French player from finding out. I barely talked to Austria and Turkey at all, so it all happened the way I wanted to. And indeed, I got a somewhat congratulatory message from the French player saying, "Well done, fellas. I thought you. I almost moved English Channel into London and Burgundy into Munich, but I was fooled by your messages, and well played." And that's a mark of a really mature, experienced player, one who understands that, that's just part of the game. Sometimes you get tricked by players, especially in 1901. And that makes me think, that player was coming so close to moving into London. I believe him. I believe the French player that they almost did it. It's something I would have thought about if I were in their position. So pat on the back to England as well, who is an early game ally of mine. The most interesting thing going on for me is that it is possible for me to decide to build I have 2 builds, and I could choose to build 2 armies, or perhaps 1 army and 1 fleet. 2 fleets would be unreasonable for Germany this early. Luckily, I laid the groundwork early on for my neighbors to accept that I might build a fleet this turn. So I think this is very good diplomatic maneuvering on my part, that all the players I'm cooperating with expect me to build a fleet in Kiel and an army in Munich, and that's what I intend to do. Nobody's going to be alarmed by that. I feel pretty good. Austria and Russia managed to keep coordinating, and Russia took Romania with a fleet, which I see and most players see as a very pro-Austrian move. And I had a conversation with the Russian player where they said, I think I'm going to build a fleet in Sevastopol, a second one, for invading Turkey. And so probably I don't want to build a fleet in St. Petersburg North Coast, which is something I had requested earlier for attacking England. I said, that's fine. That if you're going to build that second fleet, yeah, I agree. Building 2 fleets in 1901 as Russia is kind of crazy. And that kind of works with the strategy I'm going for Russia, which is I'd rather us just not really contest Scandinavia right now, and we'll all just not fight each other. Maybe England will agree to that. I will come after you at Sweden or go after England. And meanwhile, England and I will concentrate against France. And the Russian player was amenable to this and said, yeah, that makes a certain amount of sense to me, and sure, well, we could be neutral that way. That allow me to concentrate, and we'll work together later. And I said something very similar to the English player from when we were allied. Let's focus on France. Let's bring France down, and then go after Scandinavia later. Is that cool? Because first the English player was thinking, hey, you should move your fleet in Kiel to the Baltic Sea, and I said, actually, I might just want to hold with it. And the English player said, that also makes a certain amount of sense to me. We can take Sweden at any time we want. So if our Russian player is cooperating, that seems fine. I also laid the idea down with England that if the cooperation between Austria and Russia looks too strong, maybe we should accelerate our plan to attack Russia. Everything I'm saying about my strategic thinking here to those players is honest. I would rather finish the fight I started, finish off the French player, get them knocked out of the match, get some centers for myself, and then reassess whether it's to my advantage to attack England or Russia. I think that's the usual way that I play any country, but especially Germany, to focus on one enemy at a time and then whittle down your allies as you need to expand later in the game. That's been a very effective strategy for me as Germany. But it's also true that if I see too much cooperation with Austria and Russia, that might make me nervous that Russia has to be attacked earlier, because Germany does not last long if there's a strong Austria-Russia alliance on the board. And I don't really have a good read on what the Russians thinking because we're not talking. My last thought is that the Italian player said, hey, whoa, I wish I was in on this. I would have moved on Marseille if you'd have told me, and then France would have got 0 builds. And I thought to myself, man, I really wish that you had done that. If France had gotten 0 builds, that would be incredible. That would, first of all, would look really cool in these report videos to have made such a devastating attack early on. But the truth is, I was simply afraid that player, he's announcing his moves before the end of the turn to everybody. I felt uncomfortable at what I felt was maybe some leaking going on the previous turn, and I wasn't willing to take the risk. That's a shame. I later got a message from the Italian player saying, I can tell our styles are very different. I tried to meet this guy halfway and say, look, I know we've got some pretty different styles, but maybe, we can find some common ground here. And that's what he went for too. He said, like, I'm used to face-to-face playing. My style is pretty different than yours. I know I'm sending these big messages and you're sending, only so much press, and that's fine. And I will join you against France. I'll find a way to help you out, and gave me some information about maybe what some other players were thinking. So despite what I said last time about my unease about the player, I feel good that we were able to go back and forth a little bit and engage in some dialogue. And I enter my builds the way I said I would. I expected good things for the most part around the board, and I feel pretty good. I would say that was maybe a B+ of a 1901.